Welcome to podcast 6.2b. This is all about naming molecules. Now, you're probably going, naming? Oh, I thought we already did all that. Well, we named ionic compounds. We wrote the formulas for ionic compounds. We learned all those rules. But what about when we have something like this? Something that does not is not made of ions. There's got to be a way to name them, and of course there is. And when two nonmetals come together, they bond covalently. That's what we've spent time with doing the last couple podcasts. Well, we've got to have a naming system. And the good news is with this one is the naming system is really simple. They do have a newer naming system, but it really hasn't been adopted. So basically, if you could learn these prefixes, you'll find that it's very easy to do all these names. First thing, when you name a molecule, just like with ionic compounds, the second word ends in IDE. And so that's pretty straightforward. When we were doing sodium chloride, well, now we'll have things like potassium bromide. So the IDE ending is still the same. So that's the good news. The other news is that the prefixes are used to describe how many atoms are in the molecule. So you don't have to worry about charges. And that's the beauty of this. Worrying about charges for some reason confuses a number of students. When we're doing prefixes, we don't have to worry about charges. So something like this, CO2, is simply carbon, and 2, the prefix is di, right? So this is carbon dioxide. This would be carbon monoxide. Mono means one, all right? And so it's really pretty straightforward. Here's three things right here. S2O5, what would you call that? Well, you'd call it disulfur. What's 5? Pentaoxide. This would be dinitrogen. Notice I'm not putting IDE at the end. Dinitrogen monoxide, carbon dioxide, as I already said. So I've got those written out there. You can write those down. One more thing I want to mention. We never use mono for the first element. In other words, this thing over here is not called monocarbon monoxide. It's just called carbon monoxide. So that's basically the rules for it. I want to practice a few with you, and that's really all the time we need to spend with this because it's a pretty straightforward thing. Like the flashcards, though, if you don't know these prefixes, you might know them from math class or some other thing, you probably should get them into your brain. I mean, octa like an octopus, deca like a decade, pentagon, tetra like Tetris, 4 shapes, tricycle, those kind of things. So there's a lot of prefixes you already know. So let's look at a couple. Look at this first one. AS is arsenic, and the number is 4. What's the prefix for that? Tetra. Tetraarsenic. Now, what's the prefix for 10? Decox. Okay. If you don't have this written in your journal yet, you probably should write those prefixes in your journal. All right, because I'm just going to try and do these without going back and forth to that sheet. All right, the next one, BRO3. Now, wait a minute here. This looks a lot like that. Do you recognize that? That's bromite. But this is the key. Notice there's a charge. So this is a polyatomic ion. This is just a molecule. All right? So it's just, since it's not a polyatomic ion, we're just going to write it out. This is bromine. Bromine. Tetra. How about tri? Boy, I'm stumbling a little bit on this one. Trioxide. What about this one right here? Boron. Monodi. I-T-R-I-D-E. Again, the IDE ending, right? That's consistent. All right, this one right here. Dinitrogen. Trioxide. All right. And you can see again, the prefixes are pretty consistent. We don't use IDE for the first element ever. We just name it. All right. And so I'd rather not do the rest of them because we can practice more in class, but you get the idea, I hope. Okay, now let's go the other way. Now we've got the names. Let's write the formulas. Chlorine monoxide or monoxide. Well, chlorine, since there's no prefix in front, it must be 1. So there's, oops. How about this? Cl. And what oxygen? ClO. That almost looks like hypochlorite, right? Oxygen difluoride. OF2. Boron monophosphide. BF. Let's find one that's a little interesting here. Here we go. Diphosphorus pentoxide. P2O5. All right, so you get the idea. It's a pretty straightforward thing. The only thing I want to caution you on is all of a sudden when after we've introduced this, I'll put something like this, K2O. I'll put that, on a test or a quiz. I'll say name it, and students will start going dipotassium monoxide. All right, don't be that guy. The important thing is this only occurs with non-metals, right? Who bond covalently. Super important. Non-metals who bond covalently. Remember, if it's a metal and a non-metal, because potassium is a metal and it's a non-metal, that's an ionic bond. All right? Don't mix them up. Don't stick prefixes where they don't belong. All right, so we'll practice a little bit this in class. Hopefully it worked out for you, and we'll see you next time.